Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
Sally Field was actually the fifth Gidget. Peter Sellers shot Jacqueline Bisset on the set of Casino Royale. His Herman Munster getup made Fred Gwynne sweat like crazy. Robert Fuller, Julie London and Bobby Troup in Emergency. Sharon Stone showing some leg in 1983. Soundgarden singer/rhythm guitarist Chris Cornell, 1989. A young Steven Seagal, a 7th Dan black belt in Aikido. Burt Reynolds wasn't confident with his acting abilities when he filmed The Longest Yard, 1974. Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz outside of Deseu Studios in 1960, the year of their divorce. Janis Joplin performing at the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967. Two fashionistas modeling the latest ski fashion at the Italian ski resort of Cortina and Pezzo in 1976. David Bowie with curly hair in 1969. Natalie Wood, 1965. French pop icon France Gall soaking up some sun on a boat in 1967. John Wayne without his toupee and touching up makeup during the filming of The Longest Day 1961. A young Jodie Foster showing off her basketball skills in her school uniform 1976. Anne Margaret in a scene from the movie The Swinger 1966. Audrey Hepburn listening to records in her Manhattan apartment 1954. Jack Nicholson was terrified of running into Michelle Phillips' ex-boyfriend. Don Knotts was a McCulloch's go-kart ambassador in 1961. A young, beautiful and sexy Charlotte Rampling, 1960s. White boots and the miniskirt always looked good on Barbara Eden, 1965. Lee Remick and Jack Lemmon in The Days of Wine and Roses, 1962. Actress Catherine Ross at the Beach in 1966. Faye Dunaway, The Blonde Sex Kitten, 1960s. Stevie Ray Vaughan was still figuring things out in 1979. Tim Conway, Flint Wilson and Burt Reynolds doing a skit on The Flint Wilson Show in 1971. Be My Baby, The Ronettes back in 1965. John and Yoko pedaling around Greenwich Village and stopping for a hot dog, 1972. Clint Eastwood, 1960.
Robert has nothing left in his life. And just a short time ago, he thought he had everything. In general, everything he could wish for: a decent education, an excellent job, around which he built his beautiful new life. A good apartment, a prestigious foreign car, and most importantly, a beautiful wife. His reliable rear, his best friend, his true love. But something suddenly happened, something unforeseen. What he missed and what he didn't see in time. And now his whole life had fallen apart like a house of cards. Once and for all, there was nothing left, except these ill-fated crutches. And yes, he had forgotten. The main thing was not even his health. Now he is a miserable invalid, forced to drag out a miserable existence on a pension. And this at the age of 28. Why didn't he kill himself right away, when it was clear that everything on which his life was based had already collapsed? He should have ended it all in one fell swoop. There was nothing to live for now anyway. So thought Robert, jolting in the suburban bus, bouncing at every pothole, every bump. This is not the roads in the city center, not your own comfortable Mercedes. Yesterday, when Lisa has finally killed him with this message about the child, he did not even shout, did not try to sort things out, but just turned away and looked out the window. She yelled for two. You don't care about that either. You don't care. You're not interested in anything else. You're sitting in a deep out, and you're not going to do anything about it. What for? He turned to her. Why should I do anything now? Lisa, you're going to do everything now. Well, of course, she said. You'd think I was sitting on my ass before. Then you know what? What do I need you for anyway? As a free appendage to the couch. To feed you and walk you, if only instead of being an indoor dog. so they at least happy and always look. I want to live. And look at you. You might as well be hanging from a noose. Vacuum. Something's expanding. That jock she brought home last night to spite Robert came out of the bathroom. Did he hurt you? It's your handicapped brother. Good morning. Robert said to him very politely and clearly. I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but I guess you don't know everything either. I am not Lisa's brother. I am her husband, her lawful husband. But that shouldn't bother you in any way, he added, looking quietly around the long eyes of the jock, who, trying to move in the situation, dazed, transferred his eyes from him to Lisa. I'll go quietly now, Robert said. Can you feel at home? Well, maybe not exactly at home. How much is she? He nodded at Lisa. Will that let you? My time is up. Yours is probably just coming. Good luck with that. And Robert got up and poked around to the closet, picking up his bag. Before, such a procedure would have taken him 5 minutes, no more. Now a good hour. He dragged everything back and forth across the apartment, trying to get this and that. Lisa and her lover left at once, slamming the door, apparently, so they wouldn't have to look at the pathetic sight he was now. Finally, everything was packed. And what had been forgotten? The hell with it. It's like they say, you don't cry by the hair when you take your head off. Robert sighed heavily, took one last look around this hard-earned apartment where he and Lisa had been so happy. When with a great effort he lifted the backpack, somehow he threw it on his shoulders, picked up the second crutch, and went out of the house. I put my keys under the mat. If he had to find his cell phone, he turned it off and threw it in his backpack in the near future. He had absolutely no plans to communicate with anyone. He took the subway to the bus station, then waited 2 hours for the bus to arrive. Goodbye, Lay. Goodbye to my stable life. Goodbye, hopes and dreams. Hello, dear village swamp, from which he was. I don't think he's going back there after all. No, he won't. What for? Just to delay the inevitable end. To drink himself to death like his father, or die of his own handicap in a cold and cashless winter. And to have to explain something to his mother and sister, to listen to their sighs, and to look into the triumphant eyes of relatives, neighbors, and so-called friends. They were all just waiting for this upstart to fall off that unattainable tire they thought you dared to climb. And now, they were waiting. They sure as hell were right. Life is a lousy thing. And fate is a villain too. And there's no such thing as beggars from the backwoods with no lineage and no tribe to make it in life. That's only in movies and cheap novels. There you go, Robert, with your face on the pavement. You don't get it. Here's another one just to make sure you understand. He's not going to make it to his home village. He'll get off at a couple of stations. There might be a stronger branch in the woods, and you can make a noose out of rags. That's what Robert did. He came out somewhere among the fields, not far from the edge of the forest. It was a pity, but the weather was too good. It was summer, beautiful. The sun was shining. The birds were singing. At a time like this, even the most fate-abused colleague still wants to. Oh, how it would be desirable to hope for something. For example, to lie on this sunny hillside at times some fragrant grass, to breathe deeply and the air is saturated with joy. And look into the high blue sky. And then to fall asleep and not remember the grief about their misfortunes and hardships, all to forget, as in a terrible dream. Let it be like a dream within a dream, and awaken from it with astonishment to shake his head and laugh in relief. It would be a dream, and everything would be the same again. While Robert dreamed so much lying on the grass, the gentle sunshine, already going to sunset, and a light breeze, he closed his eyes and fell asleep for the first time in months. He fell into a normal, healthy, and sound sleep, without drugs or sleeping pills, not in anxiety and worry, but with a smile on his half-open lips, like when you were a child, when you lay like that in a serene field and looked at the slowly creeping clouds with reluctant thoughts. And then all thoughts leave you, and you yourself seem to dissolve among those white, fluffy, howling celestial featherbeds. Hey, someone's insistent voice broke through the fog, still enveloping his angle of vision and the clap. But wake up, I tell you. And he's pretty sensitive. A pat on the cheeks. Come on, open your eyes. But no problem. The voice drifted away again and stopped bothering him, and he fell back into the comfort of my mind. Suddenly, he heard his own scream, and the darkness burst into a scalding flash, and the scream was repeated, and Robert was himself again, sitting on the hillside. Only it was already twilight all around him, the purple gloom thickening, and someone had poured a bucket of ice-cold water on him with a swing. Water stung his head with needles, ran down his neck, shoulders, down his neck to the ground, even got into his pants. "What's the matter with you? Dazed?" Robert muttered, finally focusing his vision on the human figure clearly in front of him. "Why so? Are you awake?" The good-natured figure asked, appearing little by little into a woman of full retirement years. That is, gray-haired in a simple tracksuit and a t-shirt with a Panama on her head. "Who the hell are you?" Robert asked again, indignant at her behavior. "Why have you thrown water on me? Come on, my little dove, get up." Again she ignored his question and said in a brisk voice, "Get up. So take one cocktail, take the other, and let's go. Let's go slowly. That's good." Robert was guilty of her insistence, really got up on his feet. He was so caught up that he could hardly feel them. It's strange that in a couple of hours it can't even be like that. Or could it? God knows. He's an invalid now, and you can't even sleep outdoors for an hour. Suddenly Robert was so pissed off. This whole stupid situation. That grandmother is weird. Dragging him to the middle of nowhere and nowhere for what? What the hell did he want with her? He shouted in anger and threw one crutch. "Who asked you to touch me anyway?" And he tossed his backpack into the grass. "What the hell is going on?" The woman only stepped back a little and stood in front of him, looking at him calmly and silently. Robert shouted something else, waving his hands, letting off steam, so to speak. Then he threw the second crutch, and, unable to stand without support, he sank to the ground, covered his head with his hands, and cried. Quietly, pitifully, like a little child. But that was all. The woman came up to him again, handed him the crutches, took his backpack out of the tall grass, drew a handkerchief from his pocket, and lost his face in tears, like a baby. "Now come on, honey," affectionately she said, "because the sun will be going down soon." Robert no longer protested or screamed. The last of his moral strength had left him. And apparently, so had his thoughts and feelings. He just followed this strange woman. He walked like a tethered calf. He could hardly stop mangling his legs and asked no questions. So they walked for quite a long time. A very long way for Robert in general. Twice they sat down to rest. The woman gave him water to drink and a thermos of delicious and cool water. Then they walked through the woods again, then another field. Then it became quite dark, and Robert could not understand where they were going, what roads. He only tried to be careful not to fall in the dark, into some pothole. But the woman, apparently, knew the way well and warned him carefully. "There are roots sticking out of the ground here. Well, and now a hole. It's good. We will come to it soon. A little bit left." In this way, they crawled to what seemed to Robert to be abandoned country houses. However, some kind of life was still going on in the gatehouse, about 15 meters from the entrance, through the rusty old-fashioned gate with a broken barrier. A faint light was on, and a barking dog came out to meet them. "Well, Nada, well," said the woman to her in her own. And the dog, having given up his yapping, wagged his tail and wiped out at her. "Hello, Jack." Robert's companion knocked on the window of the gatehouse from behind the not tightly closed door. There was a clattering and a coughing sound. "Adams, are you there?" A squabbling head and a small bent, and an old man squinted in the crevice. Out into the darkness I came. And who else? "Now all assembled, we can close," jokingly threw the woman and pulled something out of her backpack. Here's your order." Oh, the old man was delighted. "Thank you, Adams. Who's that with you?" "I'll tell you tomorrow." "Good night, Jack." "Good night," said the watchman, not too contentedly, and turning to ask something louder, for Adams and Robert were going away down the path. He's not the sort to get rowdy. No, of course not, his woman was sure. He wouldn't make a fuss with crutches, would he? That's true. The old man yawned and sat down on the bench near his home. He smokes a cigarette. For a good night's sleep, Robert and the old woman walked almost to the end of the alley of the cottage village. And nowhere was there a single light. The house they needed was practically near the woods. Pulling back a simple shield, the landlady said to Robert, "You wait here for a while. I will tell John that I have not returned alone, or he will be angry." "John?" Robert asked again, not expecting to find the old lady living here with anyone. "All right, you'd think." He had some choice. Then, interrupting his sad thoughts, the door to the house, which was already lit, burst open, and the whole huge dog barked at him with a deafening bark. Robert, familiar with the dog's habits, warning raised one crutch. But the dog, without running, stood up a bit and sniffed noisily, determining whether the stranger came dangerously or not. John's voice rang out in surprise and escort. "Don't scare the man. Let's go inside." And she walked back out into the yard to help Robert up the steps to the porch. "Don't be afraid of him. He's not mean at all. Just shows what a good guard he is. Come on, John. Let's go." "I'm not afraid of dogs," Robert said quietly. "Not used to it." "That's good," nodded the landlady. "Come in and sit down. We'll have supper now." "John." "Well, you, of course. I'm feeding you now. Yes, feeding my sweet boy. You're my good boy." Sue, the hostess with the dog, who was just as much spinning around her bag, from which the different ones were pulled out into the light. And no wonder in groceries. Soon everything was ready and fed. John sprawled under the table, sniffing noisily, and in front of Robert appeared a full plate of deliciously flotsamy pasta in the country virgin, with stew and fried onions. He somehow woke up just a vicious appetite, and he pounced on his portion, just like John did on his dog bowl the other day. The lady of the cottage was sitting across from him, eating neatly from a small plate, looking at Robert and smiling. Then the kettle whistled and cups and saucers appeared, cookies and jam. Robert ate, drank, and contemplated the surroundings of the house in which he had so unexpectedly found himself. All the more so because the woman still said nothing about herself or asked him anything. It was rather cozy and somehow nice. Robert was not good at comparisons and descriptions. If asked, he would have said that the cottage reminded him of the country houses of his grandmother, the only person who had truly loved him as a little boy. Robert would often run away from the architect's house to his grandmother's. Here no one scolded him, much less beat him, and neither did this strange woman ask unnecessary questions. How about that? She picked up an unknown cripple, brought him into her house, and sits there so calmly. What if I'm some kind of maniac? And now, how do I get it on? Robert thought. But he grinned to himself. He shook himself off. Oh yes, like a crippled maniac. Very funny. So the dacha's interior was clear that once in the best, so to speak, times the owners did not skimp on materials or decoration. But over the years, much has become dilapidated. Some things needed repair, and some needed a complete overhaul. Now here is clearly not shocking. However, everything necessary for normal life was present here, and in comparison to, say, Robert's house and their parents', it was just a palace. Meanwhile, the cups were emptied and the dishes were put away, and a relaxed Robert didn't even notice much. He sat under the soft, diffused light of the glutton hanging over the round table behind the glass tablecloth and stared blankly at the table in front of him. Let's go. A woman's hand touched his shoulder. It's past your bedtime. You can't go up to the second floor yet. We'll take you to this mansion. The woman led him into a small bedroom, as if it stood out from the general facade of the house. It even had its own exit to the courtyard through a glass door. At the back of the gate there was a wooden floor of solid planks, partly covered with a beautiful rug of a pleasant muffled emerald color, a bed with an iron headboard and round spheres, as if descended from a painting to another era, and the white tulle and curtains were somehow slyly modest, completed the decoration of this lovely room. "Lie down," said the woman to him, "and you sleep well. Good night. And the bathroom is right down the hall. I'll get confused." Robert sat down on the bed and put his crutches aside. The bed was clean and soft, and it smelled of something so pleasantly familiar, some kind of grass. He stripped off his clothes and lay down flat in this soothing warmth. One last thought flashed through his mind. There was one that she had, a hotel for her colleagues picked up in the field, and all that followed was a blissful, sweet emptiness. He woke up to the sensation of someone with a soft, warm brush stroking his face. He opened his eyes and realized that it was just a ray of sunlight, piercing through a slit in the dense green shades of this tickling ray, came to tell Robert that it was morning. He sat down on the bed and pulled back the curtain. It was so unfamiliarly quiet in comparison to the bustling big city, and so quietly peaceful that his troubles somehow faded. No, nothing had changed, and life was still the same. But I didn't want to go and hang myself anymore. He opened the glass door and went out into the garden. How good was it here? There was a real sitting area set up right by the exit, garden sofas, 2 rattan chairs with cushions on them, a cheerful summer color, a small round table around the perimeter, a neatly trimmed hedge, and a semicircular archway on top, killed by something howling and blooming. The morning silence. The room outside turned out not to be silence at all, but a bird orchestra. Countless birds hidden by thick foliage sang, counted, whistled paeans and shrieks, howling in every possible way. Also heard from afar were the cocksongs and seemingly mooing cows and the distant noise of a passing train. But none of this spoiled the harmony that reigned here in the slightest. Even the distant railroad only added to this tranquil corner even more charm. Robert sat down on the armchair and closed his eyes again and sat like that for quite a long time, but not asleep, but as if he had sunk into some kind of timelessness. That's where a sweet, cheerful female voice snapped him out of that wonderful nirvana, and he reluctantly opened one eye. "Good morning. Good morning. Let's go get some exercise." Robert marveled, feeling like he was in pioneer camp. "Yes," the woman nodded her head. "Let's go. It's uncomfortable to refuse a man from whom you study, even if it is in such a strange way." Robert stood up, picked up his crutches, and followed his new acquaintance. After exiting through a floral archway, they found themselves in an orchard of fruit trees. And then there was a paved sidewalk, and a picnic area with a barbecue, an outdoor oven, and something else. Robert didn't get a good look, but he saw something that made a willy-nilly smile creep over his face. John, the owner's dog. He was sitting on a yoga mat, as if he and his mistress were getting ready to work out. Nearby lay 2 more mats. "Come on in." The woman pointed to the free one and stood next to hers. "But let me show you a couple of simple exercises," I began to Robert, but she did not even listen to him. I know. You're an invalid on crutches, and I'm an old idiot, dragging you here to do gymnastics. But trust me, it's the right thing to do, so don't argue." They spent the next half an hour doing a mixture of aerobics and Indian yoga. The amazing thing was that John did it too. In the light of day, he appeared to be a rare chocolate-colored Doberman. Strong, muscular yet graceful, with real ears, an occupied tail, and an intelligent look in his brown eyes. This dog did things with his mistress, the things that you can't think of on purpose. For example, he stood on his hind legs and kept the balance, and even turned his head. And the best pose he did was the pose that ended up being called a dog. Robert even laughed watching as the owner and the dog got on all fours, stretched his front arms, paws, and pulled his body back to lift his hindquarters. "Well, we got you out and laughed," said the woman. At the end of this impromptu workout, now let's go to breakfast. In the kitchen, the brightly lit and clean Robert was fed. Slogans with boiled sausage, sandwiches with jam, and more delicious than coffee. The hostess brooded in a turkey on the coffee stove. She didn't have a machine here. What delicious coffee, Robert praised. How do you make it? A secret. The woman smiled. Let me pour some more. Please. And Robert held out his cup to her. When he got it back, again filled divinely, smelling of strong drink, he sailed away a little and said, I'm very grateful to you for everything, but I guess it's time for me to know my honor. And where will you go? The hostess asked, sitting down with a cup of coffee. Robert thought about it. Then he answered honestly, I don't know. We never really got to know each other, he said after a short silence. I'm Robert. What is your name? Maria Adams, the hostess Maria Adams answered. She pointed to the handsome beggar John, who was sitting in front of her Viennese stool and looked hungry. James Robert. Robert replied in the same tone, with a slight tilt of his head. But you may call me simply Robert, as well as a loser. I am well deserving of it. Maria Adams laughed again, as if he had made a rather witty joke. How old are you, young man? Did she change from something to you? No more than that. 30. 28. Robert muttered, irritated by her offensive laughter. 28, she put her hands up, gesturing mockingly in amazement. Is it really okay to label yourself at that age, whatever you have going on there? At what age can you? And what do you? I'm sorry, what do you want from me? Why did you wake me up yesterday in the field, dragged me here? I did not ask you for a night or a psychoanalysis. Of course, nodded the hostess. But as for me, if for the second night in a row I see a young man lying in a clear field with no signs of alcohol intoxication, how can I pass by? Second night in a row. Puzzled, Robert interrogated. How do you mean? Like this. I know this is a great surprise for you, but I did see you in the same place yesterday and the night before. Wait, worriedly, said Robert. I do not understand what date it is today. He reached into his pocket for his bus ticket. June 22, Maria Adams told him. Do you need a year? No, muttered Robert, looking at the ticket. It had the date June 20, 2015 in blue ink. He stared intensely at the numbers, thinking, how could it be that an entire 24 hours had just dropped out of his life? It happens that way, Maria Adams said, as if guessing his thoughts. It happens. From the strong nervous shock of stress, especially in combination with prolonged insomnia. Are you a doctor? Robert said, half questioning, half affirming. And he stared at her. You're beginning to understand something. Yes, the hostess nodded. And my oath doesn't allow me to pass by someone in need of help. Oath. Again, Robert didn't understand, and then he guessed. The Hippocratic Oath. That's what Maria Adams said. No such thing as an ex-doctor. When I managed to wake you up with a cold shower, you showed classic symptoms of severe nervous exhaustion with hysterical coloring. At first, you were very noisy and agitated, and then there was a sharp decline. Your blood pressure dropped and you fell into an indifferent state and let yourself be led away, fed, and put to bed. She concluded, smiling. It's like a fairy tale, which, by the way, is often right. Forgive me, Robert, for using your first name yesterday and this morning. It was necessary for your better adjustment. Robert listened to her spellboundly, like a model schoolboy in an interesting class. Are you a psychologist? He asked again, sensing some interruption in the flow of her folded words. Oh, no. Maria laughed again. By profession, I am a neurologist, therapist, and professor of medicine. Until recently, I taught. Then she sighed, and a slight shadow came over her face. But enough about me. Tell me more about yourself, Robert. I can call you that. Of course you can, he nodded. What do you want to know? Anything you want to know, she smiled. It is better to know more about the person you are to live with. What astonished Robert. But Maria Adams, didn't let him finish his sentence by making a gesture of silence, and spoke firmly. "I thought you said you didn't know where to go. I just have a spare room. Believe me, you're not embarrassing me at all." He who himself has suffered the wreckage of all life's hopes is good at distinguishing between comrades in misfortune. Sadly, she added. Therefore, live, feel at home, until you go and decide how to proceed. Robert was silent for a moment, looking into her kind, wise, slightly sad eyes, and quietly replied, "Thank you." There was nothing more he could say. He was choked with tears. Maria nodded and tactfully walked out of the kitchen into the garden, calling John with her. Robert spent the first few days in that quiet place like a groundhog on Groundhog Day. That is, eating, sleeping, and occasionally peeking out of his hole. I mean from his room to the kitchen, and the garden. Maria Adams gave him complete freedom in everything. Whenever he woke up in the kitchen, there was food ready and a kettle for jam, and there was coffee left in the turkey for him, and he only needed to heat it up. After about a week, Robert's conscience got the better of him. He said, "Maria, look, I feel extremely uncomfortable. You shouldn't have to support a stranger. And I have absolutely nothing to pay you back." "That's all right, Robert." She looked into his suffering eyes. "It's nothing. You eat less than John. Other than that, it doesn't make me uncomfortable at all." Except that she hesitated, smiling. That he asked, anxious not to keep me company at morning gymnastics anymore. The hostess finished with a laugh. "I'd like that very much." "Good. I won't join in very willingly tomorrow." Robert nodded, feeling with their pains at this athletic warm-up, like a fish out on dry land. But what can you do, since the mistress asks? But apparently, nature itself took pity on Robert, and the morning gymnastics was a bust. In the evening, the sky was covered with clouds. Strong wind and rain started falling during the night. Soon, it turned into a real downpour, with torrents of water not toppling from the tire, lightning splitting the velvet into a black sky, and thunder rumbling, such that the whole house twitched and groaned. John crawled under the bed in his landlady's room on the second floor, and in the particularly violent rumblings, he called out in horror at the celestial spectacle. Robert couldn't sleep. Neither, apparently, was Maria. He heard her go down into the kitchen and rustle something softly. Eventually, he got tired of lying awake and got up too, and quietly reached for the closed kitchen door. "May I join you?" "And Robert, are you also awake?" The hostess looked tired. She was sitting at the table with a cup of tea in her hands, staring out the window into the darkness of night. At times, there were especially violent flashes of lightning, and everyone around her screamed. And for some seconds it became apparent, as in daylight, what was going on out there. "My head ached," Maria Adams complained. "I took an aspirin and made some tea. Chinese earth tea helps me a lot." Robert also poured this earthy tea into his cup and sat across from her. "Maria Adams, if we are still awake, do you still want to hear my story?" "Of course," she rejoiced, as if he had offered her a rare thing. "Of course I do." And Robert, looking out into the stormy and dark night, began to tell her about his life. It came out clumsily at first, not enough words. It was hard to get the sequence of events straight, but she listened intently. You could even say professionally, sometimes asking the right and timely questions, as if directing the story in the right direction. Gradually, Robert became absorbed in his own narrative and more or less coherently managed to convey to his listener everything that had happened to him. He had the misfortune to be born and grow up in a small village in the most dysfunctional, but by local standards an ordinary family. His father is an alcoholic, his mother is an alcoholic's wife. This is the most accurate characteristic of Robert's occupation, of their parents. Both, of course, had some kind of occupation, trying to work on a farm somewhere. But it is unlikely that they could remember the details. My whole life revolved around my father's rampant drunkenness and the hardships of home life. There was no perspective, no joy, no happiness in that family. And there wasn't much to talk about. Growing up, Robert dreamed of nothing but getting away. To get away from here as soon as possible and never come back. It became especially longing after Babka's death. Barely finishing ninth grade, he pulled out the money that his grandmother had given him with a trembling hand before her death, wrapped in a tin old box from something to the outside, keeping it safe from his father. Then Robert hid that box in a safe place and then re-hid it 2 more times before he died, afraid they would find it and deprive him of this one chance to get out of here on a cross-country train. Got to Milwaukee and saved on everything, even the bus, and went. Like his grandmother had taught him to look for a convent retreat. She had come here once when she was younger and had seen the place. The boy got confused, asked everybody, spent the night at a railway station, but the next day he finally found the monastery. He knocked at the gate. They opened the gate, let him in and fed him. Then some strict monk came and his eyes were as if they could see right through you, and he would ask Robert why he came to them. "You have come to God, my son. Do you want to serve him?" "No," answered the boy honestly. "I want to find a job, and I have nowhere to live." And he told everything to the truth, without concealing anything and without making up anything, as his grandmother told him. The priest listened and nodded, and then said, "Well, you can live. You'll have to find a job and a place to live for a week. We don't have a free inn, but we give honest people a place to stay. Remember, boy, time is our greatest resource, and we must all know how to use it." Robert, the council understood and understood. To spend the night at the monastery, he got up before light and came to the monastery courtyard to help with anything. I would have gone to town too. Yes, he knew that the townspeople got up late, and it was useless to look for work there so early in the morning. The monks, who were already fiddling with their chores, looked at the boy approvingly and gave him a front for a useful activity to eat breakfast with everyone else. Robert took his bag and left, providently leaving the cherished tin box in the room where he slept. He walked around the city all day, begging here and there. But in the evening, he came back with nothing. This went on for several days, and finally, by the end of the allotted period, he got lucky. At one pizzeria was a vacancy, and he was hired for a trial period. True, the housing problem was not solved, but Robert was happy about that too. As long as the summer is warm, he'd get by somehow, and then we'd see. He said goodbye to the monks and got his first real job in his life. After the trial period, he was hired as a staff member as a courier and was even given a bicycle. During this time, he spent the night in an abandoned house on the outskirts of town, rising early to walk to the place, and once a week he went to a public bath. The question of food solved itself. Employees were fed here, but in winter it would not have worked, and we had to think of something. An incident helped. One day Robert, as usual, delivered pizzas, and at one address helped the guard, who ordered a pizza, to break up 2 ferocious men who were drunk with each other in a dogfight. At the noise and commotion, the owner of the big house himself came over, and seeing how the boy had handled the big chip, asked him where he had learned to handle the dog so well. Robert replied that he had worked part-time in the countryside as a shepherd boy and had seen more than that. The farmer's herd was guarded by 3 dogs just like them, and there were all kinds of incidents, even fought off wolves with them. The man nodded and suggested Robert try working for him in the kennel. And the good thing about that offer was that he could live here in decent conditions. Robert liked this new job very much. He loved animals, most of all dogs. He spent the next few years of his life here. He made friends with the guards, graduated from evening college, and even went to law school by correspondence. The owner appreciated a good worker since he had Robert, made it much easier for him to handle his pets, and he could safely leave the boy on the farm when he was away on business and paid well. Babka's stash was being added to little by little, and the confidence that he would get his way was growing day by day. Working hard, Robert was still able to enter the law school. True, he found himself at the very bottom of the list, but it didn't matter. The main thing was that now he was a student, and not even a correspondence student, but a full-time evening student. He also liked studying here a lot. At last he began to understand how everything in the world worked in the family and in general in the environment where he grew up. No one could ever explain it to him. Work and study, diligence and hard work finally began to pay off. Robert made it to the top of the student ranks, passed his exams with flying colors, and his professors began to look at him, recruiting future employees. One such well-known lawyer in the city, recruiting interns, suggested that Robert try his hand at it as well. So he began an internship in his chosen specialty. Again, the problem of housing came up. It was no longer possible to combine working in nurseries and practicing law. The three of us with our fellow students rented a tiny apartment, and soon Robert's savings were half gone. The interns were paying many times less than he was making with his complaints. But there was perspective here. I had to tighten my belt and be patient. This tactic paid off. Gradually, he built up a clientele and went on to do some freelance work, part-time jobs, orders. By the end of the last course, his income was already higher than his previous earnings. Still very thrifty. He slowly considered buying his own home on credit, but Lady Luck was already preparing a new twist for him at their law office. One interesting trial, and Robert was hired as a second defense attorney. Very honorable for a young professional paired with an experienced lawyer. They won that trial. And after the final trial, he was approached by a man who introduced himself as one of the partners of a cool California law firm. He gave Robert his card and offered to come in for an interview. That was the beginning of his dizzying career. The winning climb up the social ladder. What's more, he took the high-speed elevator to the top floor of a major skyscraper. Everything spun and rushed with fantastic speed. And now he is a leading lawyer, head of department, deputy head, director of one of the subsidiaries. After only 2 years, he already had everything he wanted. Sometimes I could not even believe myself. Now he was no longer a country boy, without the slightest clue as to how life works. Robert had become an accomplished lawyer, a highly skilled professional, and a very successful man. And he bought a spacious loft-style studio on a high floor of a modern apartment complex, and he got a good car. And even for once he had some free time. True, not much, but even that was just a luxury. Against the backdrop of all the hard work of recent years, and in this free time, which he once spent with friends in the bar of one of the many restaurants, she, his first and only love of his joy, Sunny, came to him. Sweet Lisa, unsophisticated in relationships, he revealed all of himself to her at once and unconditionally, and she rejoiced in her rare good fortune. Such a successful guy and unmarried, and even without much of a past, I mean without ex-wives, without children and other obligations. They dated for a short time and were soon married. Lisa took the bull by the horns. She was a capital girl herself. Well, not really. From a castle far away, where I didn't like to talk about my family. She knew her way around the California scene like a fish in water, and the only thing she lacked to turn herself around properly was money. But Robert was already very experienced in the part of life regulated by law. He didn't know the other part of it at all, and so he was still the same boy at heart, ready to give all his love to the first one, who caresses him. The young wife enthusiastically began to arrange her new beautiful life. The first thing she decided to do was to sell the loft and take out a bigger mortgage, and in a different neighborhood somewhere near a park, closer to quiet residential neighborhoods. When we have kids, they'll need to live somewhere away from the noise and the gum, Lisa told him, smiling. Robert happily agreed. And so it went. She decided, he agreed, she needed an upscale car not for the status of a cool lawyer to drive a Toyota. And how could she do without a car? She needs one too. She needs a new Gucci bag. Does he really think she's gonna show up at his corporate retreat in these clothes? Yeah, Robert's coworkers are gonna laugh at us. You want an Italian kitchen set? No, nothing less. These are poor people. You have to buy local furniture to a high standard if you want to continue to succeed. And Robert bought and 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 worked like a damn man again. After all, it all had to be paid for, and he was just happy with his life at last. Everything he had worked for, everything he had achieved, had gained meaning. Now he had something to live for. He had a real, normal family, so unlike the hopeless nightmare of his parents' existence. And Lisa was arranging her newly acquired family nest, a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment near the center on the waterfront. The monthly expenses were monstrous compared to what Robert was spending on his own. He hadn't realized before that women needed so many things: manicures, pedicures, hair salons, fitness cosmetologists, not to mention clothes. You're an old man in trouble now, too. Friends laughed as they passed a glass of scotch. On those rare moments when they could get him in the company. Wait till the kids come home, then you'll be screwed. Robert laughed with everyone else, thinking how goddamn lucky he was. And then doom did come, but not quite the same as in the angry, friendly jokes. The beginning was altogether terrific. On the weekend before, Lisa made a reservation at their favorite restaurant and texted him to say she was looking forward to it. When he arrived, he looked for her, and she waved to him from the window. As beautiful as ever, as if from the cover of a fashion magazine. "Hello, darling." She gently lost her velvet cheeks against his chin. "I have a surprise, or rather, even two." And in the eyes of the silly flames, he was silent, smiling and waiting with one eye. "Here you go." She handed him an envelope. "There were 2 airline tickets to Venice with the anniversary of the road, but I haven't figured out what to get you for almost a month yet. This is our present together." She laughed. "The whole tour hasn't been paid for yet. I've only paid in advance." "Good," he stroked her hand. "I'll have to reschedule some things, but I'll try. And the second one's a surprise. And the second one you'll get when we're in Venice." His wife promised him, but it didn't turn out as planned. On the way to the airport, the cab skidded on the slippery road, and they had an accident. Lisa was almost unharmed, but Robert badly injured his spine. When he regained consciousness in the hospital room, his wife was sitting next to him, crying. "Come on, baby," he told her. "Don't get upset. It's going to be okay." "No," she suddenly shouted with anger. "No, it won't. The doctor said your rehabilitation will take years. Years. Do you understand what we will live on?" Robert closed his eyes and tried to concentrate. So calmly, without panic, he opened them again and spoke, suffering from the incoming pain and with an effort, moving his lips. "Lisa, the baby. We'll think of something. I promise. Your promises are worthless now." And she ran out of the room in tears. He was discharged 2 months later. She did not come very often, and he was well aware of all the work that was now thrust upon her, poor thing. They had no particular savings. Despite their outward prosperity, on the contrary, they were in debt. They lived beyond their means, like the vast majority of the successful middle class in quotes. Robert returned home to their comfortable apartment on these very crutches. Lisa was still in the same nervously hysterical state. When he asked what was wrong with her, she began to shout something like, "Don't you see and don't you understand? Everything is falling apart. There is no money. The loans are not paid." And she burst into tears as Lisa collapsed on the couch. Robert picking closer, but nothing is lost yet. "I'll go back to work. I'll go to rehab. I'll get out again in the process. Well, we'll wait a little while to sell one car. I wonder which one." She got up, looking at him so angrily, as if he had been responsible for that unfortunate accident. "Mine, of course. Mine," he hastened to say. "How am I supposed to drive now?" "Okay." She calmed down a little. "You promise you'll make it all better?" "Yes, of course I do." Robert kissed her awkwardly, touching her lightly. "With his lips, I promise." The next day, he went to the office, where in the meantime, as luck would have it, there had been a change of management. The new director, who had come to the position from a rival company after a difficult merger process for the firm, looked over his personnel file without much interest and asked if Robert really thought he could work like this. "Yes," he replied. I'm used to a lot of trouble. Good, nodded the boss. Then you can go right now and join the new unit as a probationary assistant to one of the departments, right? Certainly. How dazed was Robert? After all, it meant many times less pay, no bonuses, and everything all over again. Yes, he had the best seat when he arrived. What do you want? Dry, the director asked. We are cutting the staff. The company is not interested in employees with low mobility. You should be thankful that we do not fire you. We've taken into account your past achievements and experience. Thank you. And with that, Robert muttered. That night, he didn't even know what to say to his wife. She was already on edge all the time. Her eyes were red. She was nervous. Finally learned, after a few weeks of her husband's new status, she threw a tantrum. From her words, it came out that he broke her whole life, promised her a mountain of gold, and left her broke. Baby, we'll make it up to you. Just give us time. He begged her. Ah, a deadline. And she's like a snake. A deadline, you say? What if I told you we don't have that deadline? What do you mean? Don't you understand, Robert? I'm pregnant. You idiot. She screamed in a voice not her own. Haven't you noticed yet? It's too late to have an abortion. I'm 5 months pregnant. You know. Robert marveled. Why didn't you say so? I wanted to cry. She wanted to. Remember the second surprise? Here it is inside me. And she put her hand on my stomach. It's growing by leaps and bounds. What are we gonna do about it now? What am I asking you? What do you mean what? Robert suddenly calmed down and concentrated. Give birth, of course. And tried to hug her baby. I'm so glad. I am not. She yelled, pulling away again. This is not the life I wanted for my baby. What can you give him now? Poor beggars. Lisa, calm down. Robert said firmly. What are you talking about? What abortions? What poor people? You and I have everything we need. We'll sell my car. We'll cut expenses. We'll spend less. We'll wait. We'll get through this. And it'll all work out. To hell with you and your begging. Broad psychology screamed again. Lisa, you've always been that way, and you always will be. All you have to do is shrink and spend less. And live. Live when? What? He asked. She was already angry. What did you think I was and still am? A stupid, worthless redneck. She blurted out in frustration. That's how. Robert didn't answer her. He went to the room where he was working in a sort of temporary office, which would soon become a nursery. He closed behind the flap of the doorknob and sat looking out the window. There was a lot of life going on around him, cars rushing back and forth. People were rushing around. And it suddenly occurred to him that everything he had achieved was nothing but a pretty wrapper. As in a dream, he heard Lisa still yelling, rattling, breaking something, I think. He didn't care. So he who to her was just a tool to achieve her goals. And that's her favorite catchphrase for all the things she hated so much. It always makes him cringe at this urban slang. What does she know about poverty? A well-to-do city girl, though she probably thinks of poverty as not having enough money for overseas trips several times a year and a new Gucci bag every season. I wonder how much more he would have had to buy, build, and purchase to make her happy if not for that unfortunate accident. Robert suddenly realized that he had never reached her high standard, that he had been the social elevator for her, which for him was a good education. But what would he do without her? After all, he had promised to take care of her, and now they were going to have a baby. No matter what, it was their child and his own blood. He wouldn't even allow the thought of leaving Lisa behind, whatever she thought of him there. And their baby, after all. It's not her fault he is the way he is. Maybe she really should live her life the way she thinks is right. Who says his opinion is the only right one, and everything else is just women's nerves, hormones. She's going through a 100% hard time right now, and she needs to be supported. Having come to that thought, he left the room and wandered off to see where his wife was, but she was nowhere to be found. She didn't answer her phone either. Robert began to worry. He called and wrote 100 times and was about to go looking for her. But then she wrote that she had gone to her mother and would be there tomorrow. But at least she showed up, and thank you for that. He lay down on the sofa and began to think about how to fix the situation. He did not work much in this state. It was true. So he had to put all his energies into treatment. That, of course, cost money too. But what? So Robert opened his laptop and placed an ad to sell this car. Then he went out on the balcony and looked again at the noisy city at night, which seemed never to be calm, just like its inhabitants, just as frantic, running somewhere, trying to do something. Can he blame them for that? Where we live defines us. By Sunday evening, Lisa returned brighter, lively. One might even say reassured little one. He embraced her as soon as she had time to enter. I'm sorry, and you, and me. She clung to him, embraced him just as she had before. They went into the living room kitchen. Robert made tea. Lisa got out some homemade goodies. They talked and sat and discussed what they were going to do. She softened her stance a little. She agreed that yes, it was nobody's fault. And now was not a good time for expenses. I proudly showed him my latest purchase of a manicure lamp I will make myself. She announced, smiling. We'll save a lot of money. Robert smiled. You're good, and I already have a buyer for the car. He's coming tomorrow to look at it. We'll be fine. Really? Don't worry about it. Oh yeah, of course we will, Lisa said. But you know what I was thinking. If you're a little bit now, it's a little bit out of shape, and your income is unstable. Then it can come and bailiffs for arrears on the loan. Really? Well, Robert answered theoretically, but I'll try not to let it come to that. But my wife insisted anyway. I feel better if I knew that our property was secure. You can make it so that everything is registered in my name. You could, Robert said, without a second thought. If you draw up a prenuptial agreement, though, still credit obligations, but we'll pay them off now, in part, with the money from the sale of the Merc. Then the bank will probably agree. That's how happy Lisa was. Let's do so, dear, so I'm not afraid to live. I beg you. There were tears in her eyes. All right, no problem. He was glad that he could still do something to reassure her. I'll make an appointment with the notary tomorrow. Sure. What about you? The baby is fine. Give me your hand. She smiled and put his big warm palm on her already visibly swollen tummy, covered only by the robe. At first he felt nothing but her pleasant and close warmth, but suddenly there was a distinct jolt. Then another. He raised his happy eyes to her in amazement. Did it hurt you? No, she laughed. It's just that it looks like your son is going to be a soccer player. My son. He exhaled and took her in his arms. A week later, they made a contract, according to which all property, both jointly acquired and acquired by Robert before the marriage, became Lisa's sole property. You understand all the consequences, the treatment of such a transaction? Asked him the woman notary. Of course, he nodded. I myself am a lawyer by training. Then I don't need to explain to you in detail, she nodded. Don't forget to tell your creditors. Oh yes, he was well aware of the consequences. And they, as if determined to test his strength, did not fail to come rather quickly. A month later, he was fired from his job without explanation, not even allowed to see the general manager, and bashfully averted their eyes in the accounting department, issuing the calculation of the work card. Of course, he understood perfectly well what it was all about. Didn't pass the probationary period, didn't show the necessary efficiency. The company is not interested in employees with low mobility. It's okay, he told himself. I didn't get out of anything like that. I will find another job. I still have some money to spare. I'll have to stop rehab for a while. So what? We'll make it up to you later. Suck it. When he entered the apartment, he smiled at his wife. I have two pieces of news. One is good, and the other is also good. But it looks like he tried to turn it into a joke. Which one to start with? With the one which is not good, Lisa looked at him expectantly. No, let's start with the good one. He was still smiling, leaving one crutch in the check room. I open my own practice while online. I'll have another office later. Did you get fired? Her eyes narrowed angrily, and that doesn't bode well. Yes, but you still dare to tell me good news, she yelled again. It was as if they had already been evicted from the street. How dare you? Baby, come on. I promise you, everything's gonna be okay. He tried to defuse the situation. You already promised me last time, she screamed. Where were your promises? It's only going to get worse, and nothing good will come of it. Who will hire you as an invalid? With what money are you going to rent an office? You seem to have lost your brain, so you can't hear what she's going to yell. Robert went back into the room, but found that there was nothing there. The furniture had been taken out, the wallpaper stripped. What is it? He asked Lisa, who flew in behind him. Can't you see? It's a bloody expensive renovation of the children's room. And I've already signed the contract. What for? He was astonished. We agreed to save money. We didn't agree on anything like that. You thought I'd let my child not even have a proper nursery. Robert went into the bedroom without saying another word, but she came after him and yelled, and yelled, and yelled. Finally, he could not stand it and asked what you want from me, that I should go right now and bring you another life in a beautiful box. Why don't you give me a little bit of a break? After all, I'm tired too. Don't you understand? I feel bad, painful, and hard. And I haven't seen any support from you since then. I've never seen any support from you since. And he waved his hand in despair. Ah, so you just got mad. Now you want support from your pregnant wife. And why not? He looked at her longingly. After all, I don't ask anything of you except understanding and a little patience. That is all I need. You will get neither until you have solved all our problems, said the wife. Again, she packed her bag and slammed the door, and he was alone again with the pain of despair and hopeless blackness into which his prosperous life had slid. Lisa came back the next evening, and not alone, but with some appointed man. Both of them were heavily intoxicated. Lisa, who is it? Robert was taken aback. He still couldn't believe the worst that was happening. What is it? She asked him cheerfully and lightheartedly. What do you care? What do you mean? What do you care? He was angry. What the hell are you doing? What are you doing here? He turned to the boy. He gave a mocking look to the wimp with crutches, hummed, and went into the bathroom to wash his hands. Helpless and angry, Robert looked at Lisa, breathing heavily. How can you do this? You're drunk. You should have thought of our child, Lisa said, so businesslike, swaying a little. First of all, I can do as I please. I am the rightful mistress here. Secondly, how can you be so sure? Whose baby is that? Oh, really? Robert went pale. Helplessly, he leaned against the door jamb, clutching it so hard that his knuckles snapped. What are you talking about? What have you heard? She answered nonchalantly and angrily. You didn't knock me up. I see. Nothing of yours is here now. Not here, she moved her hand around. Not here, she touched her belly. She walked away proudly down the corridor, as if she were in some bad, silly movie, adding to the tattered room by pulling up a chair. Awkwardly, leaning on his backrest, he dragged him inside, locked the door, sat down, and closed his eyes. Apparently, he sat like that all night. And in the morning he went out, packed his backpack, and left. And that was it. He finished his story. He sighed heavily. Outside the window, the thunderstorm was still raging, and Maria Adams was sitting opposite, frowning slightly and staring thoughtfully past Robert. Not much of a good thing. Finally, she said, turning her gaze to him. But you know, Robert, that's no reason to end your life. He smiled at her, you know that. Though, of course, it's not hard to guess. Yes, it is, the landlady agreed. And it is not hard to guess. And it's not hard to leave forever. It's not hard to go on living. What about you? Robert asked her. Are you yourself? He hesitated, unable to find the right words. Somehow it seems to me that you're not doing so well either, not at all. The landlady agreed, but this time it's better than before. Besides, I'm in a more privileged position than you are. I have a place to live. She smiled. At least for now. What do you mean? Robert got worried. I think I'll tell you my story too. Maria Adams said thoughtfully, since tonight is the night of revelations. And that's what she told him. A few years ago, her life began a dark period after the death of her beloved husband. She and her husband had been living together for years. And then he left her overnight. A heart attack. Even doctors are not always able to recognize trouble in time. And medicine is still far from being omnipotent. Yes, he too was a famous surgeon. In his time, he invented his own method of several complicated operations. In essence, they lived a good life. At least, if it were possible to go back and change something, Maria would not change anything, except this last fateful day. But time had passed. Had the wound healed? No, it hasn't stopped hurting, and it never will. But it calmed down and kind of got a little easier. Yes, there was a lot of pain here. She wouldn't bore him with a list of them. It's not interesting at all. She had to leave her beloved work and go to a well-deserved rest. That is, to live out her days in sadness and waiting for the inevitable end. Yes, she was lonely, very lonely. Their only son had been dead for a long time. An accident. The only family left was a granddaughter, but there were no close relations with her. Daughter-in-law quickly married for the second time after her husband's death and did not want to keep in touch with her former father-in-law and mother-in-law. But not so long ago, about 3 years ago, the granddaughter showed up unexpectedly. She came to the widow and grandmother. Such a grown-up, already a beauty. She was about to get married herself, talking about it. Maria Adams involuntarily smiled. Her gaze warmed, and Robert looked at her as if he could see with his own eyes how happy the old woman was to see her grown granddaughter, whom she remembered as a baby, on her doorstep. "Hello, Granny. You recognize me, Emily." Maria Adams splashed her hands. "Is it true? Are you me?" The girl laughed. "May I come in?" "God, yes, of course, come in. Why did I make such a fuss, woman? How big you've become, quite a bride." And she shed a tear, like all grandmothers do when they see their grandchildren. "After a long time apart, I can hug you." "Of course," and Emily, smiling, leaned over and hugged her grandmother herself. "How have you been?" "Oh, I'm fine. A little sick, but refreshing. How about you?" "I'm getting married." "You are? My God, how time flies. Too bad your father and grandfather didn't. Lived until this day." And Maria Adams finally cried. Then they drank tea and candy that Emily had brought. Talked about everything. Maria Adams received an invitation to the wedding, which really touched her. After all, they hadn't seen each other for so many years. Reading. With her daughter-in-law, the former is practically a stranger. When she shyly asked her granddaughter if her mother would mind if she came, Emily only shrugged her shoulders. "How should I know? We hardly speak to her. They live in Amsterdam anyway. I'm still here. Why didn't you come to me sooner, Grandma?" She's upset again. Her own blood has been abandoned for so many years, and she knows nothing. "Forgive me, granddaughter." She repented. "I did not know anything." "Come on, Grandma," I waved my hand. "I'm not offended. You do not think. Honestly, I haven't thought about you for years either, and I should have. But now let's make up. Let's talk again. We're family. My darling, you've melted, my golden girl." They met a few more times. Emily would come, bring her groceries, do all sorts of things that the sick grandmother was having a hard time dealing with on her own. And soon she met her future husband. Maria liked him. A nice young man and educated. And he knew how to hold himself. Maria was happy again, found joy and the meaning of life again. When you are not alone, when your loved ones are with you, you can cope with any misfortune, any misfortune. About 2 weeks before the wedding, Emily and Max invited Maria to the restaurant to meet the parents of the groom. He has a normal family, and I have no parents. It's good to have you, Grandma, said her granddaughter. And in her voice the old woman could hear genuine joy and love. And after that dinner, which went without a hitch, Emily dropped in on her one evening. Grandma, do you want to talk? Yes. Dear grandmother was happy to talk to her beloved newfound granddaughter. I do not even know where to begin. And she made such a worried and sweet face that Maria even squeezed his heart in his chest from love and desire to help his dear daughter's blood. Anyway, Grandma, could you sign over your apartment to me? Emily asked, looking at her pitifully. What for? The woman marveled. After me, everything will be yours anyway. Who else would I leave it to? You know, Grandma, my granddaughter was a little too much. Max said that if you draw up as an inheritance, but then she hesitated a little, then there will be huge taxes, just a gigantic and expensive apartment, because you and I are like no longer relatives. My stepfather adopted me. You probably don't know. Of course I don't know. Maria Adams flashed her arms. But if you do, don't worry about it. Grandma hugged her and kissed her. Everything will be the same as before. Nothing will change. We have a place to live. You've seen Max's parents. He's got a big 2-bedroom in NY. So it's okay. It's just so I don't have to run around with paperwork to prove I'm not a fool. Emily laughed. You've lived. You'll live. You believe me, don't you? And she looked again the way her little son had looked at Maria when he didn't get the toy he wanted. Lord, of course I believe you, my darling. And Maria hugged her granddaughter again. I have to go to the notary. Oh, do not worry, Grandma. We will not drag you through the lines at all these offices. Now everything can be done right in the MFC and everything. Max knows how to do it. He'll make an appointment. We'll take you by car right on time. Just make sure you're on time. Say it right. Okay. Okay. Maria Adams repeated after her granddaughter. Just as long as you're happy, darling. Need I tell you what happened next? With a sad chuckle, Maria Adams asked Robert. I can roughly imagine. He stretched out sympathetically. So they deceived you? Yes, she nodded her head. The older woman wiped away a tear. And I was like a fool, and I fell for it. As they say now, what exactly did you sign? Robert's professional interest woke up. I do not remember. She answered with a question to the question where she signed and signed. As in a fog everything was. I could only see the way out of that fog at the time. After Michael's death, they drove me, and they brought me back. And for a few more months I lived peacefully, as if nothing had happened. Emily came sometimes alone, sometimes with Max, and they postponed the wedding. They said they had to because of his father's illness. Well, then her voice wavered. These terrible memories were not easy for her. For the summer I, like every season, left here for the dacha, paid the communal rent for 3 months in advance. I left the keys with the chairman of our HOA and lived here for myself. And when she came back, the lock wouldn't open. I took a closer look, and it's not mine at all. What's wrong? I went to the housing office. I asked what's wrong with my door, or maybe there was a flood, and they picked the locks, and they told me there was no flood. You sold her apartment. Then my legs buckled, and my head started floating. I just opened my eyes, and you wouldn't believe it, Robert, just like you. All around me unfamiliar faces, all white. And they tell me it's been 3 days, like 3 days. What? Why a stroke? They say you have a grandmother, and now you have to keep it steady and not make any unnecessary moves. Otherwise something might happen again. And you know, I am not a stupid woman. I am a doctor, and I cannot even say a word. I just cry and cry. How long or short? They lifted me up on my feet, and even old acquaintances of mine were there to help me. I bow to them, but where should I go? In the winter, the apartment is not mine. Emily's not answering her phone. She's not at her address, and strangers say she never existed. I did not understand anything at first. Then after a few months, I realized that my own granddaughter left me. As they say, Maria grinned incredulously. And there you have it. I now live year-round here in this old dacha. A lot of electricity burns out in the winter. There is no gas heating here. I save almost all my pension in the summer, so as not to starve to death. But nothing, John and I have adapted. John, you're all I have left of my old life. He's my beautiful, smart, and international champion. Maria Adams proudly added, only an old man by dog standards. Just like me, in fact. So here we are with him, and cackles together. In the summer, we were foraging for something in the garden, even though I never liked it. All I wanted was flowers and a lawn, but I had to. We also picked mushrooms, berries, and different herbs. It's all right with the strong stuff, as long as we have something to squeak with. Maria grinned bitterly. And most importantly, where? What do you mean? Robert looked suspicious again. Has she gone out of your house? No, Maria Adams shook her head. At least I know nothing about it. And what does she need my dacha for? It costs nothing. And there are no conveniences. Besides, these cottages won't be standing for long. Why tear them down soon? Rumor has it some developer is buying up the land for cents. They say most of the neighbors have already bought it. There are so many of us who haven't sold out and still live here in the season. There are only a handful of us left. And in the winter, there are only 2 of us. No, it's just me and John. And the watchman. You've seen him. He has a similar story to mine. Only it's a long time ago. He and I live here together in this house in winter. We can't leave him alone in a cold shed. Maria Adams. Robert, worried, even stood up without crutches, leaning only on the table. Maria Adams, you just opened my eyes. And not only eyes. You gave me back my life, both literally and figuratively. If I could, I would kneel down in front of you. No, Robert. She got worried, went over to him, took him by the arm, and sat him back down. Then she stepped back to pour more tea, and her shoulders shook. No, listen to me. The boy wouldn't let up. I promise you, do you hear? I promise I'll do everything I can to help you, even beyond that. We won't discuss the details now, but we'll do it tomorrow instead of the gymnastics. And suddenly he laughed lightly and cheerfully, as he had done before the whole thing with the marriage credits and the accident and losing everything. But now it seemed to him that he had not only lost everything, but on the contrary, he had gained experience, gained wisdom, gained faith in people. After all, there were good, kind people. One of them is sitting opposite and her eyes are red and sad and sick, and I want to help her so badly. She, not knowing him, helped him completely, saved him from trouble, from the noose, sheltered him, warmed him with her warmth. Yes, he not only worshipped her, he must kiss her feet for the rest of his life. And Robert also realized that it wasn't true that he had nothing left. His main resource, the one that had allowed him to make his way in life, was still there. No one would be able to take that resource away from him. He worked hard to get it. He studied mountains of special literature, thick codes of complex legislation, polished practice, polished successful advocacy. Education is not his bargaining chip. The card is a good, quality legal education. With it, he will help Maria get back what was stolen from her. What would it cost him? With such happy thoughts, he fell asleep. He awoke when the sun was high and not a trace of the previous night's downpour was left. Everything was singing and green again. The kitchen was empty, and there were 2 pancakes still warm on a plate covered with a napkin. Robert took the plate, poured himself a cup of coffee, and wistfully walked out, helping himself with one crutch into the garden. The cushions on the couch were soaking wet, but the hostess had already taken them off the chairs and wiped the table dry. Robert sat down, began to eat his breakfast, and thought beside him. Immediately John was formed, and looking into his eyes with a devoted gaze, He swallowed his drool and impatiently stepped over his paws. The beggar laughed and tossed him the last piece of cheese. The dog flapped his mouth and caught the cheese on the fly. "Well done," Robert praised him. "The reaction is spot on. How old are you now?" "They say you're old." "That's not true. You don't look old at all. Look, what a handsome man." Doberman, listening to these compliments, wrinkled his nose in the bright sunshine. "He will be 10 this year," said Maria Adams, stealthily coming up. "And I'm 67. No way." "Surprise, Robert. You look 55 at the most." "Really, don't you?" "Oh, come on. You're a terrible liar." The woman laughed. "I can't," Robert agreed. "And I don't lie. You do look well, though. Not that great, but better than a year and a half ago," she said. "Gymnastics helps me. It's my own thing. Remember I told you that I'm a Monopoly therapist and neurologist by profession. So I can't massage myself, but some exercises, even in static poses, are very conducive to the overall health of the body. And of course, the right diet. With the second component, John and I have no problems at all," she smiled. "My pension is just enough to buy the right ones. Our state takes care of us elderly people." "Thank you very much, Maria Adams, for a proper and tasty meal," smiled Robert. "Remember what I told you last night? It's time to get started." "Oh, Robert. And I was thinking," she began hesitantly, "maybe we don't have to go through all this. I don't think I can stand any lawsuits meeting Emily. God be her judge. Let her live. Let her use it. As long as she needs it so. She is, after all, my own granddaughter. After all, I haven't been very good to her either. She had never visited her since her son died. Of course, my daughter-in-law wasn't very enthusiastic, but I should have persisted too." "Maria Adams," Robert interrupted her, looking at her strangely. "Are you sure it was your granddaughter?" "That what? What do you mean?" The woman looked confused. "What do you mean?" "The thing is," sighed Robert, "judging from what you told me yesterday, this case has a characteristic pattern of apartment swindlers. I have been involved in such cases in my time." "But no," Maria Adams firmly objected. "Don't I recognize my own blood? How many years have you not seen her?" Robert did not give up. 5 and 10. In such a span of time, children change beyond recognition sometimes. "Did she ever show you any of her photo ID? Passport, driver's license? How old is she on her passport? Year and place of birth? When you signed the contract, did you pay any attention to these details?" "No, I don't know. I don't remember anything, Robert," the woman exclaimed in extreme agitation. "You've really taken me aback just now. Could it be?" "Quite," nodded Robert. "The database of residential property owners is now publicly available. There's no problem at all. Find out who owns it, for how long, on what grounds. Look at the register of the relatives, where they live, since what year, and so on. The last two resources are more difficult to reach, but with some skill it is possible. I assure you, in this way to calculate the lonely elderly person is not difficult to pretend to be his long-absent relatives also easily. You just can't imagine what scammers are capable of. Yes, they are a whole theatrical performance. Sometimes they act it out. Your case is quite standard." Maria Adams sat stunned. Her lips were trembling. She shook her head back and forth frequently, and Robert was frightened. He cursed to himself, "The damned fool. Why did you startle an unprepared person so quickly? She could have another stroke from the stress." But the woman raised her head, and he suddenly saw joy in her eyes. Robert looked closely. Yes, it was joy. And she suddenly smiled and said, "So that means that maybe it wasn't my own granddaughter. So there's a chance that she grew up to be a good person and had nothing to do with it. Lord, if that's true, I pray, let it be so. Robert, my dear, is it really possible to find out?" "Surely." "I think so," he nodded. "And we can try. Only you'll have to write me a power of attorney." "Of course, I'd be glad to." And Maria almost threw herself on his neck. "Oh, my darlings, fate has sent me. To hell with it, with this apartment, and to hell with it. If only the granddaughter had nothing to do with it. If only she hadn't turned out to be that crook. Now that there was business to attend to, Robert changed completely. He walked to the bus stop himself, drove to the nearest village, paid for the cell phone service for himself and Maria, whose phone, like his, had been disconnected since time immemorial. Why the extra expense, and who was she to call? And if anything happened, the ambulance wouldn't get here in time anyway. When he returned, he took his laptop computer out of his backpack and got internet access. Fortunately, there was a cell tower nearby. And it all worked out, as he put it. For 3 days, he sat up all day and night, staring at the screen and looking at something, writing and calling and sorting things out. At last, without going into much detail, he told Maria that he had found a thread and took her to town to write out a power of attorney. They returned after dark, but Robert was noticeably amused. There in town, not far from the notary's office where they were, he went to a couple of other places, sat his companion down while he relaxed in a small, cozy cafe, and picked up some papers. "Tell me, dear Maria Adams," he asked her that evening, "does a last name, first name, middle name like Jenna Thompson mean anything to you? Was she born in 1992? No, the hostess was wary. And who is this party, according to your treaty? Robert answered. And seeing that she didn't understand, he explained more simply. She is the girl with whom you signed the deed of gift. As far as I understand, she can't be your granddaughter. Her name was Emily. And rightly so. Well, her middle name, she could have changed too. But her first name is very unlikely. And the year of her birth. What do you think of your granddaughter's year of birth? Emily thought about Maria Adams, and Emily seems to be in 90 or 91. So it's not her. But how did you know that, Robert? Quite simply, he said. I ordered an extract from the registry. But that wasn't all. There was another transaction after the gift, just at the beginning of last summer. A contract of sale between this Thompson and a Mexican citizen, Carlos Fernando. This, of course, is a front man. Now they are waiting for the 3-year period to expire, so that they do not have to pay unnecessary tax on income of individuals, and they will do it again. The scheme is well known, and we beat them to it. And Robert leaned back in his garden chair. And we'll give you your apartment back. Now I'm 99% sure of it, as you all know so well. For the first time since they had met, Maria looked at him with respect. But that's my profession. Robert smiled. It's the only thing I have left. But it is the most important thing. What followed was a rather lengthy trial. As always in such cases, Robert gathered all the necessary papers and evidence, found witnesses, neighbors, employees of the housing office, former colleagues of Maria Viktorovna, visited her in the hospital, took certificates of her stay in the hospital before and after the transaction on the state of her health at that time, added the registry office his documents, and again took her to the notary to certify the woman's own affidavit, so as not to drag the poor woman to court, not to traumatize her unnecessarily. When everything was ready, I wrote a statement to the prosecutor's office about the initiation of criminal proceedings for fraud. The lady who played it out like a note, the role of a long-lost granddaughter, declared wanted in civil proceedings, and a few months later the court ruled to recognize both the original transaction of donation and the subsequent sale null and void, committed under the influence of grave circumstances and misleading one of the parties. That is, simply put, explained Robert, his savior of nice, your apartment is yours again. In addition, the guilty party, the same Thompson, should pay you compensation for the moral damage caused. True, only after she has been caught. And she's not the only one. She did not act alone, but with accomplices. This Max's alleged fiancé and his parents are also fake. All members of the same gang already. What with their participation? Several similar episodes were committed. All over delay in a week, I will go and get the judgment with the entry into force mark and submit it to the registry. And in another 2 or 3 weeks, I'll finally bring you the new documents for your apartment. Robert, I don't even know how to thank you." The older woman was touched. "What would John and I do without you? You gave me back my faith in people to live a normal life. You gave me back my granddaughter. Even though I have not seen her for many years and probably never will see her again." She came up to him, hugged him tightly, firmly, and kissed him on both cheeks. "Thank you. Thank you so much. And you, Maria Adams, have you brought yourself back to me?" He answered her. "So you and I are completely even." Then he smiled slyly. "I have a little surprise for you, a bonus, so to speak. Look." He handed her a simple envelope. She opened it and took out a small photograph. On it was a young girl, blonde and smiling. She was standing somewhere on the beach by the sea, holding up her long hair with her hand, pulling it away from her face because of the strong wind. "Do you recognize her?" Robert asked her. "That's it. That's my Emily." "Yes." Maria looked at Robert questioningly. "Yes," he nodded. "It is your real granddaughter, Emily Williams. The last name is different now. She got married recently and lives in Canada now. Her mother moved there with her husband. And so did she. In 2005, I found her on social media, wrote her, explained the situation. And she responded, 'Let me know all this,' and sent me a picture for you. I printed it out. Where did you find her? What networks?" Once again, I did not understand. A woman is like that. Robert wondered how best to explain. Such virtual platforms for online correspondence and video meetings on the internet. "Do you have WhatsApp or Viber on your phone?" "No." Maria smiled. "Why should I? If you don't mind, I'll restore it for you. And then you can communicate with Emily, correspond, make video calls, and exchange photos." "Really?" Maria Adams marveled. "Has it really come to that? How long has it been?" Robert confirmed. "Soon, they will probably invent how to teleport objects and people." "Oh dear, I hope I won't live long enough to do that." Maria laughed. "So come on, Robert, please install those very nets for me." Gradually, the birds died down, and the ubiquitous, energetic John stopped scurrying about the grounds. And Maria Adams was still sitting in the garden in front of the exit from the room reserved for Robert, mastering the new mindset of messengers. She exclaimed something happily, and if she succeeded, what she wanted. And now and then she showed him the screen of hers from March. "Look how pretty she is here," or "How about this message with the address?" Robert, smiling, looked, showed, and pinned. And he thought to himself, how lucky was he in life after all? Yes, lucky, in spite of everything. So he lost everything he had gained. What were his years? He would be cured for good. Recently, he saw a doctor, and the doctor told him that everything is pretty good and only needs rehabilitation of physical therapy and massage in parallel. We'll go back to practice. So, I think I've already started. The main thing is to work hard, and don't give up. The rest will come with it. He was sure of that now. There was only one thing that bothered him. Lisa was going to have a baby. Was it really not his, or had she been talking out of spite? He had to find out for sure. By the end of the fall, Robert was without crutches. He was still limping, but that was nothing compared to what he had had to endure before. He moved back to the city, rented a tiny room in the middle of nowhere, way outside of downtown. But for now, it was all he had money for. He didn't think much of it, though. So where would he sleep? He worked hard, as always, started his own website, a virtual legal clinic. He was reinstated at the Bar Association and paid his dues. Occasionally visited Maria Adams in her city apartment, brought her favorite candy and John. Something to indulge in every time he withstood the defense, rejecting her persistent offers to move in with her. But look where I am alone in these rooms. I'm lonely here. I will come to you more often. Maria Adams will at least stay the night. Oh, please, Robert. Sometimes he would give in to her insistence and stay in the morning. She sang like a joyful crow and baked pancakes. Very tasty, by the way. Robert always joked that he stayed just for these pancakes, and John was very supportive of him. The pancakes would only appear when Robert stayed overnight. By the spring, he had opened a small law office of his own, making a promise to himself never to take a job for hire again. No matter what happened, and recruited partners from among the student interns. I don't want to be in that situation again, where an employer throws you out on the street as an unnecessary thing. He spoke Maria, and she quite understood him. Finally, at the end of the following summer, he made up his mind. He took out a clean, freshly dry-cleaned suit, unwrapped and ironed a new shirt, and shaved carefully. He stared in the mirror for a long time, trying to make out something known only to him. Then he resolutely exhaled, left the house, and drove to his old address. As he approached the painfully familiar door, he immediately heard the muffled cries of a child. His heart just jumped out of his chest and beat fast. Calm down, concentrate. He ordered himself and pressed the doorbell. Lisa herself opened the door for him, fat and unkempt, all something tortured. Such he had never seen her as before. He felt pity for her. "Who do you want?" she asked. She asked him, squinting strangely. He kept silent, staring at her in bewilderment. Could he have changed so much that she no longer recognized him? "Hello, Lisa," he squeezed out at last. "Didn't you recognize me?" "Robert?" she said, surprised, and held out her hand, groping at him like a blind woman. "What is the matter with you?" Suddenly he was horrified, and there was such tenderness, such pity, as if these terrible months of all the tragic and sad events, quarrels, scandals, and offenses had never happened. "My eyesight went down a lot after childbirth," she explained. "I leaned my head sideways and looked somewhere past him. It was a hard labor." He looked where she was looking and saw the baby crawling across the carpet toward the exit of the room. The baby looked pretty big already. He must be about a year old now. Why is he crawling? He should be starting to walk by now. It was like guessing his thoughts. Lisa said he has cerebral palsy. He can't walk yet, but he'll walk. He can't stand in the doorway forever. And the draft is not good for him, she added. They slammed the front door. "Shall we go in? Let's have some tea, shall we? Tell me how you're doing. You seem to be walking without sticks now." She asked me something else. She spoke indifferently, like an old acquaintance who happened to visit, and he barely listened. He looked only at the baby, who was squirming unnaturally, still trying to crawl, but doing very badly. Robert came over, took the baby in his arms, looked at him properly, smiled at him, and the baby suddenly smiled back at him too. And so changed at this time his tense information, a grimace of pain. His face became such a joyful, shining eyes that Robert felt cold in his chest and tears came to his eyes. He carefully put the baby back on the rug and sat down near the low table, where Lisa had brought teacups. Asked her one thing, "Is it mine?" "I do not know," she answered just as indifferently, as if she were talking about a stray puppy or a kitten. "You don't know." He almost choked on the incoming anger. "Yeah," she retorted. "How should I know?" He was suddenly startled to recognize in her new unfamiliar habits her mother, whom he'd only seen a few times. Lisa wasn't really interested in communicating with her. Robert shuddered at this recognition, and it all came flooding back, which it did. The pleasant memories immediately evaporated, but the baby he hadn't evaporated, hadn't gone anywhere. He was here and needed help in his Robert and help. "I'm going to leave now," he told her, "but I'll be back soon. I'll take you to a good doctor one of these days. She specializes in just such cases. If she can't help you, she will certainly tell you who to go to." "What do you need it for?" Lisa asked lazily. "You want to make yourself look good and get it all back from me." "No," Robert grimaced. "I don't want anything from you. I only want to help him." And he nodded at the baby. "Okay," she shrugged indifferently. "Call." Maria Adams examined little Charles for a long time, groping, thin legs and arms, finally gave her verdict. The muscle tone of some is weak, of course, but it is correctable. Of course, you need surgery, and probably more than one. You were told to go to this clinic. Where are you registered? She asked Lisa, but she mumbled something incomprehensible. She and Robert looked at each other. They realized that she had given up on everything a long time ago and had made no attempt to deal with the health of her child. I will take him to the clinic, Robert said to Lisa. I'll pay for the surgeries. I'll take care of him. I'll pay child support. Don't you want to find out if he's yours first? She asked him mockingly. And in that question he heard the old Lisa as she had shown herself at the end of their relationship, arrogant and unprincipled. Selfish. No, he cut her off. I don't want to. But that's your business, she said, and then she sank again. For the next year, Robert and Maria Adams took care of little Charles. This stalwart had had to endure 3 surgeries, complicated therapy, and more. They practically lived in the hospital, taking turns as needed. But when the worst was over, the results were immediate. The baby started to sit up independently, hold objects, and even try to speak. The prognosis was good. Many more years of hard work lay ahead of him. But Robert wasn't the least bit afraid of that. They divorced Lisa, and she officially gave him custody of his son. The practice of law, Robert went uphill and started with a high-profile lawsuit, which he and his partners won from the same developer, who tried to squeeze the land of Maria Cottage Village. Soon it turned out that such attempts were made in many places, and all the victims of these illegal actions turned, of course, to the lawyer who was able to pin the tail of their offender. Maria Adams, at Robert's insistence, returned to practicing medicine, and now works part-time for pleasure in a private medical center, also owned by Robert, or rather, his company, which, however, is the same thing. The 3 of them have grown so close that they have become one friendly family, where everyone respects and supports each other. And then one day at one of the family dinners, Maria invited a young girl granddaughter, her colleague from her previous job, to visit her. Kate also had a difficult fate. She was abandoned by her fiancé before the wedding and left her for the daughter of a rich businessman. The girl had a hard time with that tragedy. Maria also helped her in her time. And now there is just the occasion to unite the 2 lonely souls of Robert and Kate. But they had no idea of the plans yet. The slyly smiling woman, and enjoyed her delicious apple pie.